control over our regulations, our trade, and our foreign and defence policy. This clarity has brought benefits. Far from jeopardising negotiations, it is making them more straightforward. In the last few weeks, I believe the chances of a deal have risen. This week we are intensifying the pace of meetings in Brussels. Our European friends can see that we want an agreement, and they're beginning to reflect that reality in their response. President Macron said, I quote, if, Mr. Speaker, they don't want to hear the words of our counterparts across the Channel. They don't want to hear about any progress that we might be making. They don't. Mr. Speaker.
Order. I want to hear everything said in the order. Well, I've never had any difficulty hearing the Prime Minister, but if it is necessary for him to speak up, I am certain... Order! I'm certain that he'll overcome his natural shyness in order to do so. The Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think they're willfully closing their ears to the reality that our friends and partners are increasingly seeing the possibilities of an agreement. I quote President Macron of France. If there are things, he said, which as part of what was negotiated by Michel Barnier can be adapted and are in keeping with the two objectives that I've mentioned, stability in Ireland, which we all support, and the integrity of the single market, we should identify them in the coming months. Is that the negative spirit of the opposition benches? No, it isn't. And speaking in Berlin of possible alternatives to the backstop, Chancellor Merkel of Germany said, once we see and say this could be a possible outcome, this could be a possible arrangement. This backstop is a sort of placeholder which is no longer necessary. She said. That's a positive spirit, which we are not, I'm afraid, hearing echoed on the other side of the House today. And I believe there are indeed, they're fleeing already, Mr. Speaker, to go to the beach, fleeing already. There are indeed solutions. They don't want to hear about solutions, Mr. Speaker. They don't want to hear about solutions, but they don't want to hear about a deal. There are practical arrangements that we can find which avoid anyone putting infrastructure on the Irish border, Mr. Speaker. And I say to the honourable members departing back, and he knows it well, these have been well worked out and involve measures such as trusted trader schemes, transit provisions, frontier zones, reduced bureaucracy for smaller local traders, and many others. In particular, we recognise, and I advise the members opposite to pay attention to what is being said. We recognise that for reasons of geography and economics, agri-food is increasingly managed on a common basis across the island of Ireland. We are ready to find ways forward that recognise this reality, provided it clearly enjoys the consent of all parties and institutions with an interest. We will also be discussing this with the EU shortly, and I will be discussing it with the Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, when I see him in Dublin on Monday. Mr. Speaker, it is simply wrong. It is simply wrong to say we are not making progress. There is a lot to do in the coming days, but things are moving. And a major reason for that is that everyone can see that this government is utterly determined to leave the EU on October the 31st, come what may, without a deal if necessary. And that is why over the summer my right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, has been leading the government's efforts 7 days a week to accelerate our national preparations for this possibility. And he will be making a statement on that subject shortly. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor, has made all the necessary funds available. We have already reached agreements with our partners to roll over trade deals worth around 89 billion of exports and imports. We have secured air services agreements around the world. We have increased the capacity of our border force, strengthened the resilience of our ports, bolstered our freight capacity, and worked with meticulous detail to ensure the uninterrupted supply of critical goods, including medicines. We will be ready, Mr. Speaker. We will be ready. Mr. Speaker, I returned from the G7 with real momentum in the Brexit discussions. I want to return from next month's European Council in a similar way, with a deal that this House can debate and scrutinise and endorse in time for our departure on October the 31st. But, Mr. Speaker, there is one step that would jeopardise all the progress that we have made in the G7 and around the capitals of Europe. And that is if this House were to decide that it was simply impossible